Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of chapter 2. Here we go. When the sound of his footsteps died away, George turned on Lenny. So you wasn't gonna say a word. You was gonna leave your big flapper shut and leave me do the talking? Damn near lost us a job. Lenny stared hopelessly at his hands. I forgot, George. Yeah, you forgot. You forgot, and I got to talk you out of it. He sat down heavily on the bunk. Now he's got his eye on us. Now we got to be careful and not make no slips. You keep your big flapper shut after this. He fell morosely silent. George, what you want now? I wasn't kicked in the head with no horse. Was I, George? Be a damn good thing if you was, George said viciously. Save everybody a hell of a lot of trouble. You said I was your cousin, George. Well, that was a lie. And I'm damn glad it was. If I was a relative of yours, I'd shoot myself. He stopped suddenly, stepped to the open front door, and peered out. Say, what the hell you doing listening? The old man came slowly into the room. He had his broom in his hand, and at his heels there walked a drag-footed sheepdog, gray of muzzle and with pale, blind old eyes. The dog struggled lamely to the side of the room and lay down, grunting softly to himself and licking his grizzled, moth-eaten coat. The swamper watched him until he was settled. I wasn't listening. I was just standing in the shade a minute scratching my dog. I just now finished swamping out the wash house. You was poking your big ears into our business, George said. I don't like nobody getting nosy. The old man looked uneasily from George to Lenny and then back. I just come down there, he said. I didn't hear nothing you guys was saying. I ain't interested in nothing you was saying. A guy on the ranch don't ever listen, or he don't ask no questions. Damn right he don't, said George, slightly mollified. Not if he wants to stay working long. But he was reassured by the swamper's defense. Come on in and sit down a minute, he said. That's a hell of an old dog. Yeah, I had him ever since he was a pup. God, he was a good sheepdog when he was younger. He stood his broom against the wall and he rubbed his white bristled cheek with his knuckles. How'd you like the boss? He asked. Pretty good. Seemed all right. He's a nice fellow, the swamper agreed. You got to take him right. At that moment, a young man came in the bunkhouse, a thin young man with a brown face, with brown eyes and a head of tightly curled hair. He wore a work glove on his left hand, and, like the boss, he wore high-heeled boots. You see my old man? He asked. The swamper said, You were just here a minute ago, Curly. We went over to the cookhouse, I think. I'll try to catch him, said Curly. His eyes passed over the new man and he stopped. He glanced coldly at George and then at Lenny. His arms gradually bent at the elbows and his hands closed into fists. He stiffened and waved into a slight crouch. His glance was at once calculating and pugnacious. Lenny squirmed under the look and shifted his feet nervously. Curly stepped gingerly close to him. You're the new guys the old man was waiting for. We just come in, said George. Let the big guy talk. Lenny twisted with embarrassment. George said, Suppose he don't want to talk. Curly lashed his body around. By Christ, he's got to talk when he's spoke to. What the hell are you getting into it for? We travel together, said George coldly. Oh, so it's that way. George was tense and motionless. Yeah, it's that way. Lenny was looking helplessly to George for instruction. And you won't let the big guy talk, is that it? Well, he can talk if he wants to tell you anything. He nodded slightly to Lenny. We just come in, said Lenny softly. Curly stared levelly at him. Well, next time you answer when you're spoken to. He turned toward the door and walked out. His elbows were still bent out a little. George watched him out, and then he turned back to the swamper. Say, what the hell's he got on his shoulders? Lenny didn't do nothing to him. The old man looked cautiously at the door to make sure no one was listening. That's the boss's son, he said quietly. Curly's pretty handy. He done quite a bit in the ring. He's a lightweight, and he's handy. Well, let him be handy, said George. You don't have to take after Lenny. Lenny didn't do nothing to him. What's he got against Lenny? The swamper considered. Well, I'll tell you what. Curly's a lot like little guys. He hates big guys. He's all time picking scraps with big guys, kind of like he's mad at him because he ain't a big guy. You seen little guys like that, ain't you? Always scrappy? Well, sure, said George. I seen plenty of little guys, but this Curly better not make no mistakes about Lenny. Lenny ain't handy, but this Curly punk is going to get hurt if he messes around with Lenny. Well, Curly's pretty handy, the swamper said skeptically. Never did seem right to me. Suppose Curly jumps a big guy and licks him. Everybody says what a game guy Curly is, and suppose he does the same thing and gets licked. Then everybody says the big guy ought to pick somebody his own size, and maybe they gang up on the big guy. Never did seem right to me. Seems like Curly ain't giving nobody a chance. George was watching the door. He said ominously, Well, he better watch out for Lenny. Lenny ain't no fighter, but Lenny's strong and quick, and Lenny don't know no rules. He walked to the square table and sat down on one of the boxes. He gathered some of the cards together and shuffled them. The old man sat down on another box. Don't tell Curly I said none of this. He'd slough me. He just don't give it to him. Won't ever get canned, 'cause he's the old man's boss. George cut the cards and began turning them over, looking at each one and throwing it down on the pile. He said, This guy Curly sounds like a son of a bitch to me. I don't like mean little guys. Seems to me like he's worse lately, said the swamper. He got married a couple of weeks ago. Wife lives over in the boss's house. Seems like Curly's cockier than ever since he got married. George grunted. Maybe he's showing off for his wife. The swamper warmed to his gossip. You seen that glove on his left hand? Yeah, I seen it. Well, that glove's full of Vaseline. Vaseline? What the hell for? Well, I tell you what, Curly says he's keeping that hand soft for his wife. George studied the cards absorbedly. That's a dirty thing to tell around, he said. The old man was reassured. He had drawn a derogatory statement from George. He felt safe now, and he spoke more confidently. Wait till you see Curly's wife. George cut the cards again and put out solitaire lay, slowly and deliberately. Purdy? He asked casually. Yeah, Purdy, but... George studied his cards. But what? Well, she got the eye. Yeah? Married 2 weeks and got the eye. Maybe that's why Curly's pants is full of ants. I seen her give Slim the eye. Slim's a jerk-line Skinner, hell of a nice fella. Slim don't need to wear no high-heeled boots on a green team. I seen her give Slim the eye. Curly never seen it, and I seen her give Carlson the eye. George pretended a lack of interest. Looks like we's gonna have fun. The swamper stood up from his box. You know what I think? George didn't answer. Well, I think Curly's married a tart. He ain't the first, said George. There's plenty done that. The old man moved toward the door, and his ancient dog lifted his head and peered about, and then got painfully to his feet to follow. I got to be setting out the wash basins for the guys. The teams will be in before long. You guys going to Buck Barley? Yeah. You won't tell Curly nothing I said? Hell no. Well, you look her over, mister. Well, you see if she ain't a tart. He stepped out the door and into the brilliant sunshine. George laid down his cards thoughtfully, turned his piles of 3. He built 4 clubs on his ace pile. The sun was square on the floor now, and the flies whipped through it like sparks. A sound of jingling harness and the croak of heavy-laden axles sounded from outside. From the distance came a clear call. Stable Buck, ooh, Stable Buck. And then, where the hell is that goddamn Negro? George stared at his solitaire lay, and then he flounced the cards together and turned around to Lenny. Lenny was lying down on the bunk watching him. Look, Lenny, this here ain't no setup. I'm scared. You're gonna have trouble with that Curly guy. I've seen that kind before. He's kind of feeling you out. He figures he got you scared, and he's gonna take a sock at you the first chance he gets. Lenny's eyes were frightened. I don't want trouble, he said plaintively. Don't let him sock me, George. George got up and went over to Lenny's bunk and sat down on it. I hate that kind of bastard. I've seen plenty of him, like the old guy says. Curly don't take no chances. He always wins. He thought for a moment. If he tangles with you, Lenny, we're gonna get the can. Don't make no mistake about that. He's the boss's son. Look, Lenny, you try to keep away from him, will you? Don't ever speak to him. If he comes in here, and move clear to the other side of the room. Will you do that, Lenny? I don't want no trouble, Lenny mourned. I never done nothing to him. Well, that won't do you no good if Curly wants to plug himself for a fighter. Just don't have nothing to do with him. Will you remember? Sure, George. I ain't gonna say a word. The sound of the approaching grain teams was louder. Thud of big hooves and hard ground, drag brakes, and jingle of trace chains. Men were calling back and forth from the teams. George, sitting on the bunk beside Lenny, frowned as he thought. Lenny asked him timidly, You ain't mad, George? I ain't mad at you. I'm mad at this here Curly bastard. I hoped we was going to get a little stake together. Maybe $100. His tone grew decisive. You keep away from Curly, Lenny. Okay, that concludes Chapter 2, Part 2. Coming up is Chapter 2, Part 3 in the next segment. Thanks, guys.